So I'm recording now. Okay, great. So, like I said, we've gone into this new mode of the ACOP to be where we can do either project work, questions, or I'll just present something I think is of interest. So I want to start before this. I want to do the session on coaching. Remember, even though I've expanded things, and actually, let me show that. Just to make sure we know what I mean, because I think I did talk about this, but um, what I've decided to do, because this is maybe a keen insight that I've gotten, what I've decided to do is convert all my written materials into one book. And not everything in all the materials is going into the book, because the coaching book, which is a really good book, but we intentionally made the coaching book Amplio agnostic. In other words, it was just really how you coach. Okay. And I really want to create this thing. Thanks, Susan, for the name, Amplio Body of Knowledge and how to use it, which is going to integrate everything about Amplio, including the coaching, because that's something I wanted to talk about today. But we'll have just probably references to things like the Lucid boards and the PowerPoints, any of the support you get in AU, but everything in Amplio University is going to be in here, and except for the references of the support material. And part of the reason of this is I've said this many times, and it does not seem to be appreciated in the agile space or in business. In fact, that's funny. I think it might be appreciated more in business than in agile, because in business, at least they don't make a big deal out of it. Agile makes this huge deal about people. People are important. Yet we don't talk about how people will react to something new. I admit waterfall kind of just assumes they will, but that's okay because they don't talk about people being so important. Agile talks about people being important and then ignores the importance of people. It's just remarkable. That one thing and the lack of a diagnostic system and the lack of perhaps having a statement of the purpose is to create value value for your critical stakeholders seem to be amazing missing pieces to all this. So um, so the thing is, I've expanded basically the ACOP to just basically be a self-study program now of Amplio. And if you want to stick to coaching, which you're welcome to do, then I've got a coaching section and I've been adding things here. Now I'm not going to put the whole book up here, and I've got to make this easier to navigate than what I've got. But what I do pretty much every day, every other day, is I add things from the coaching book into here. And I'm going to focus, I'm going to move about 2/3 of it. There's some stuff that's really good, that came from Paul. I thought it's really good, but it to me loses the focus. It had us lose the focus a little bit of what I would consider Amplio coaching. So I'm not going to move that onto here. And then this will eventually get published. But while I'm doing it, I'm here. Now, let me tell you. So this is something you read this. I would suggest you go through and you read this. And as you read it and you have questions, and every day we'll have 20 minutes. I see Thomas is here, but Thomas, I've got a clock on my first screen, so don't worry. So you can hold me to it. At 8:40, I'll switch over to Q&A. Okay? And we're going to keep that. And I'm actually glad you're there because to be honest, I think I'd forgotten that. I saw your face. Oh, yeah, 40 minutes. So we're going to stick to that structure. And what I wanted to talk about today is really this, because I was thinking about this more and more, this diagram. Because this happened, I don't know, not quite 3 years ago when I first started this whole idea of teaching. And I was doing some Amplio development workshop. It was basically teaching, I don't even remember if it was that. And I kept getting asked by people, how do I convey this to other people? And I realized, oh, knowing how to do something, being brilliant at it is great if you're a one-person project. And if you're not, you need to know how to convey it to other people. You need to know how to coach them. You need to know how to mentor them. You need to know how to lead them. And yet in the agile space, and actually maybe in the world in general, this is taught separately. It is taught separate. It is the world in general does this because I've been in things. But the thing is, again, agile makes a big deal out about people. So we should realize that if we're going to talk about if we're going to talk about we have concepts in the domain, we need to know how to coach them. If we have practices in the domain, we need to know how to coach them. The teaching coaching separately is ineffective. I don't mean it can't be done. I don't mean you can't learn, but it should be designed. And this is actually how we do things in AU, is that we take these different pieces. We talk about understanding the human condition. That's the other thing. It's not just about how to listen and speak clearly, which is what people talk about with coaching skills. It's how do they interact with you, not how do you interact with them. I mean, you need to know that too. So how do I interact with them is here, but how do they interact with me? These two go hand in hand. But the key to me is if there's a new concept to teach somebody, like how do they understand what first principles are? How do they understand that creating workflow delays causes waste? That having too many things to work on causes multitasking? How do you coach somebody in that? I mean, you understand it, but how do you coach somebody else to understand it? You don't want just general coaching. You want to be able to, what I do here is I evoke their own experience. Or what could be maybe not just tacit knowledge, but Thomas once called it ambient knowledge. Well, it is ambient knowledge. It's a different thing. There might be what they did experience, that maybe they experienced something similar to what you're trying to get them to understand. See, this requires knowing what you're trying to tell them. In other words, as you learn how to coach, one of the things you can learn is how do you coach this particular concept? Because we've talked about this before, what we call the pickup six model. The pickup six model is what's the step by step by step by step way to understand things. And then that goes another way, is maybe somebody else has taken somebody from point A to point B. And maybe it took them a long time to figure out how to get from point A to point B. Why do I have to reconstruct that method? I give an example. When I was teaching design patterns a lot, there was a pattern that's totally useless now because it's built into the languages. But back in the day, you had this pattern called the visitor pattern, which gave you a way to kind of do an automatic redirection of a function. It wasn't in C++. In fact, it's probably still not in C++, but Java had it. At some level, Java added it, and C# added it, and it's a useless pattern. But back in the day, it was a very useful pattern, and it took me about an hour to explain it. And about 4 years later, it took me 10 minutes to explain it better. Now, why was that? I knew the pattern when I started, and it took me an hour. The reason was every time I would start refining it, where the little increment, I made it so it was just a little increment of learning, and I understood what people would object to or what they would understand. And I learned this path. And this is what we did at Net Objectives on a regular basis, by the way. We had 4, 5, 6 design pattern training people, and everybody could train their own way. But we would always collaborate with each other and say, oh, here's how you get this point across. Oh, here's how you get that point across. See, that's reinvention if everybody has to do it themselves. So this here is how do you not have to reinvent how to explain some concept. This here is how do you explain this concept based on their past experience. And this one is how are they going to react to you? Maybe you're plugging them in. Maybe you're pushing their buttons. How can you just coach by knowing how to ask questions and how to be? Now, I'm not saying other workshops don't address these issues. Well, actually, I will say they definitely, a coaching workshop that's not about a particular method is not going to address this or this. Because by definition, these are the type of methods involved. Now, I'm going to pause. You see the difference between coaching? Now, good coaching courses would have these two things, although most talk about this. I see very few coaching courses that really delve into the human condition, how people are wired. Pause for questions.
Well, I have a question if nobody else does.
Yeah, please don't hesitate.
So one of the things that I've encountered recently is I have a client who's been trying to shift people's understanding of their roles and the nature of the work that they do. And he's had multiple sessions with multiple people, and they don't seem to get it. And at this point, my thinking is that there's something blocking them, that they don't want to get it. Because, like, so how do you work with that and uncover that so you can figure out why they don't want to get it, so that you can get them where you need them to be?
Oh, Andrew, that is such a perfect question for this whole issue. That is exactly what I'm talking about. Can y'all relate to the question? And you've had that experience. Now let me say this. Well, here's how I would do it. First of all, you're not going to change their values. I liked what you said. You're not going to change their values. What you might do is get them to understand there's opportunity in the shift that's wanted that's consistent with their values. Okay. In other words, if the people actually do want to add value to the stakeholders, and if the manager actually has a way of working that would add value to the stakeholders, and the question is, how do you get them to see that? Is that another way of restating it? But now where I'm keeping their values set.
Yeah, that's pretty much, because I think in this particular case, part of it is that they've got it bound to what they're doing, and the way that they're doing it is a lot of their identity, and they don't want that challenged. So that's got to be unpacked and separated. But because it's about shifting the nature of two specific roles, and it's like they just don't want to at this point. And
Right.
so it's like, how do you, I mean, you got lots of tools, you got the pickup sticks model, and you got the concepts, and you've got all of this stuff, but how do you help them recognize that it's not that they don't get it, it's that they don't want to get it first, and then help them see the benefits of the new way, I guess.
Yeah. So notice how you're talking about this and this, because you're talking about a new way of working.
Exactly.
Okay. So let's first of all start reframing things. When you say something like, they don't want to get it, how much possibility, this for everybody else, you too, Andrew, but for everybody else, when you say they don't want to get it, how much possibility do you have?
Zero. That
Yeah.
was
So,
more of an observation more than
yeah,
saying it.
no. There's a judgment in there that you don't even notice. This is some
Okay.
coaching on coaching. Coaching, remember I talk about our reality shows up in our listening, our I call what Flores called listening. So Andrew's listening is they don't want to get it. That creates our reality. They don't want to get it. I have absolutely no possibility now. He's not consciously thinking about this, but you see how that's inferred.
Well, actually, but on that point, that's the conclusion that I came to, because to explore whether that was the problem or not.
Okay, so let me rephrase that statement, which is exactly what you mean, but is stated differently. They don't want to get it with their current perception. Now, it's different. Think about the difference. I'm not being semantic here. I'm not talking about minor things. See, if you say they don't want to get it, then they don't want to get it. I can't do anything about it. If they say they don't want to get it with their current perception, then what possibility is now open? You see the difference? It even feels different, doesn't it? They don't want to get it. I can feel the tension in my chest. Oh, they don't want to get it with their current perception. There's now an opening. Your body actually senses this. Now the question is, you don't know how to do that.
Well, yeah, but I think actually the I would almost restate what you just said,
But
because
please.
that is a process that is necessary if you're going to figure out how to get around something that you see. So you can make the observation, they don't want to get it. Okay, the next question
You don't want to
is,
get it now.
Right. But why don't they want to get it? Because if you don't ask the why don't they want to get it, you can't get to the point where it's, well, they don't want to get it based on their current reality.
Yeah, I think you're walking down a good path, but I'm actually saying that you're trying to get to a solution, and I'm trying to say a better accurate statement of the problem is they don't want to get it with their current perception, or they don't want to get it
Yes.
in the current reality.
Yeah.
Because that now you can, and actually now you can ask a couple of things. Well, is it they don't want to get it because it's their current perception? Do they not want to get it because of the current reality? But it's not that they don't want to get it, which sounds concrete. I'm stuck. The thing is, we live in the reality of how we speak about it. This is something that, the Edgar Schein quote I like a lot is, we don't think and talk about what we see what we are able to think and talk about. So when I say they don't get it because, excuse me, either the current fact, and this is really good because I'm realizing that part of what I should be doing here, in fact, what I will do here, I just realized I can put it in the chat, is is to do something like ask they don't want to get it based on values, situation, whatever. And this now gives us an opening. What other things might be affecting them besides their values or uh, not their value? They want to get it at the time.
Well, it's like the identity question, I think, has a,
Yeah, at the identity question. Yeah, well, so this is interesting because in that case study with the salons where they didn't want to sell, their identity was I don't sell, I'm an artiste. And I shifted to show how what we did is we shifted to show how following the making suggestions of product fit their identity as an artiste better than fit their identity as a salesman, and they shifted behavior effortlessly. I mean, it was
so,
immediate.
but you're giving them a get out clause that way by changing the role that they have.
No, not necessarily, not necessarily. That may be the case, but it could be, look at the role. So look at the role. Here's the other thing. Look at the role you want them to do and
Mhm.
ask, is there a way they can reframe the role that you want them to do into the identity they have, not as an action, but an identity as what value they create. Okay,
Yeah.
here's a comment right here. Here's a very important distinction. Most people value who they are and what they are by what they do. Go to a party. Next time, notice, who are you? Oh, I'm this or I'm that. That's why these labels, I'm a scrum master, I'm a this, I'm a product owner. You're putting your person, your being into this identity. So now if you try to discover and see one of those roles is bad, you're actually saying you're bad. This all
Right.
happens subconsciously. It's not something somebody logically thinks about. Oh, you had a bad day, and it's like, well, I didn't get my job done. And you feel bad. Don't you feel bad when you don't get a good work done? It just feels bad. And we were trained in this by our parents and everybody around us that we looked up to. Bad boy, bad girl, bad this, don't do that. It's hard to get out of that energy. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get them out of that energy. I'm just saying notice it. Okay. So our
Yeah.
ego,
And the reason I brought that up was the challenge here is that the role or the job has the same label, but the definition is different.
right. So the question is, what are their values? If their value is adding value to the customer, then can they change their actions with the same role name as before? But what I'm trying to drive here first, let me do this and then I'll give you an example. What I'm trying to drive here first is the idea that if they identify their value with their actions, you're not going to get them to change their actions. Let me say that again. Because people identify their value with their actions, if you just shift their actions without adjusting how they think about themselves, they're gonna have a lot of resistance to this. Okay. Yeah, and then powers usually you kind of press on. I mean, may not understand what you Yeah. So then you only some people hear. So let me give you an example. So I go into places all the time where developers say they just want to code. Oh, I just want to program, testers test. Okay. Now why is that? That's because they like coding. And in fact, if that's all they want to do, then and that's all they want to do, and that is their value, about their value that they can do coding because that's what they like, they're not gonna, I'd fire them. But I don't think that's the case. I've worked with a lot of developers, and I know they say that a lot. But what I think underneath all that is they like to code. Well, it's fun. But they also think that's their skill to create value for customers. And underneath most developers I've worked with, they is a real commitment to value to the customer. There's just so much garbage in the way they look like jerks some of the time. But they're not. They just look that way. They get into safety mode. Oh, I can't try this because I'm already behind and I'll get more behind. So that's a defensive action of saying no. They're not being a jerk. They're just saying no to protect themselves. If they understand their value is to create value for the customers, the stakeholders, then you can, and I believe that's true, but most of the time they don't talk about it that way. See, if you talk about my job is coding, then it's hard to get something. If your job is creating value, it's a different conversation. So the way I've always handled this, and I've been reasonably successful, I say, well, what's your real purpose? And you're using coding. I make a distinction between purpose and action. So the distinction is your purpose is to add value to the stakeholders. Your action is coding. You have a certain set of skills. Is there a certain set of skills you could use that increases value that includes things besides coding? And then it's like value means the code has to work. Well, how do you do that? Now you can talk about working with testers. So my question to you, Andrew, would be, what is the value proposition they have themselves? Because you're not going to change that. It might be obscured. In other words, they may not see it. And sometimes people think it's in conflict. Like I remember this case study, I think it's case study 1 or 2 in the case studies where I talk about dynamic mobbing, where this guy started understanding lean and he kept standing up and saying, Al, if I believe what you're saying, and I do, that means my team has to slow down, and I don't want my team to slow down. See, he had 2 values that actually conflicted. He didn't realize they conflicted until I got there. One value was he wanted his team to be the best team. And the second value was he wanted to add value to the team, that overall, his whole group. And at some point, he realized him holding on to his team being best was conflicting with the whole group working. And then he realized that that's what he really appreciated. And actually, the value of his team shifted. Instead of measuring the value of his team by how much they coded, or rather got features, he shifted the value of his team by how they enabled everybody else to work. But his values never changed. This is why when you build a framework on top of a set of values, it's hit or miss. Well, what if you don't have those values? You can't change people's values. I mean, values do change. I've seen criminals change into, seriously, I've seen criminals change into very upstanding people I totally trust. Their values shifted out of it, but they had a traumatic event called going to jail or other things happening. But that doesn't happen in the workplace quickly. Okay, so go on. How would this give you some ideas on how to move forward, or have I already given you some ideas? And anybody else chime in. This isn't just between me and Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge here is that I'm trying to help him talk to the people who are quote unquote not getting it. So I'm one step removed from being able to kind of do this myself.
Okay, this is really helpful. I understand. So, and this is actually absolutely part of what Amplio University is about, because I could probably go in there and have some impact, but I know what I would do. So what I can see, we've talked about templates that you could use when you're talking to others. But what we want to do here is, what's a template we could give him? Not to follow. Templates aren't I mean, sometimes templates can be followed. You know, if you're about to take a plane off, a checklist before the plane takes off is a good idea. But sometimes templates are there to just trigger thoughts.
Yeah. And I mean, like, just based on this conversation, I'm sure that if I was in front of those people, I could get them to see past what it was. Because,
Good.
but yeah, the trick is, how do I distill that into a way that gives him what he needs to do to facilitate these ongoing conversations that he's been not successful in having for months?
Okay, so I'm going there. That's perfect.
I know. I appreciate this very much, Al.
No,
Thanks.
this is perfect. This is perfect. This is exactly how to learn. The best way to learn is have a real problem, figure out how to solve it, and then go back and look to see how did we do that? What were the things? So one of the things we have, this is one of the distinctions that's in the book. What makes an expert an expert? What are the distinctions? What are the things they see? See, a guy who's a good skier, I don't know how good this guy is, but he knows more than me. A professional skier or expert, you know, in the Olympics, I don't know if they're professionals, but they know what they're doing. They have probably 20 different kinds of powder distinctions. Maybe not 20, but I have powder. That's it. I have yellow snow. I have slush. I have good snowball making snow, all right? Because that's all I need. So these are distinctions. So there's something you're seeing that this guy you're trying to help interact with these other people. So there are three sets of distinctions, actually. Okay, there's yours, there's his in the middle, and there's this other guy. So what I'm suggesting, what hits me here is you look at what are the things you would be looking at. You should make a list. What are the things you'd be looking at? And we've mentioned a few of them. Okay, first of all, let's not hold it that they're not willing to change. They're not willing to change now because of the situation they're in. Their value system, they don't line up. There's their values, there's the way they think they get their values satisfied, and you're offering them a different way to get their values satisfied. So you should make a
They
list of,
don't see that connection.
they
That's
don't see that connection. Okay. So first of all, this is great because I've been thinking more and more, you know, coming back to this thing. I've been seeing more and more. I admit I've been focusing a lot on the lack of first principles, the fact that we don't do diagnoses, the fact that purposely incomplete is accepted as an idea. It's like to me, these fundamental beliefs that have just pervaded the agile space. That because some things will emerge, we can't take advantage of what we know. I was thinking about that this morning because somebody had mentioned Kinevin to me, and I was thinking, well, you know what? Things have to emerge, but that doesn't mean you can't know an awful lot about what the product's going to look like. That doesn't mean there's not an awful lot of stuff you can do that you know with certainty will be an improvement. That complex relationships typically obscure things, and they can cause a nonlinear event that had we seen it coming, we'd have seen it was about to be bad. But we don't see it coming because it's complex, and by definition, we don't see complex relationships. So, so the point is, if we want to know how we need what we're talking about here, what you've been talking about is what are their values. When we recognize, we want to be very careful about our languaging. We want to say, okay, is it really true that they won't change? No, they won't change with the current environment. They won't change with the way they're thinking about their values. Then make a list of these things. And what I'm also thinking, this is something we talked about in Amplio University, is we needed more checklists for the attendees. I suspect they're the same checklist. In other words, if I was to make a checklist for you, even though you know it, it's still a nice referral. That could be a checklist you could give him. That's a good question. Is that the same checklist? I think it is.
I think it is, I think that the difference would be how much then you would need to. So there's two ways to approach that. There's a potential delta between me and him. So you could address that delta an easy way with perhaps a different checklist, or you could address that delta with what do I need him to learn so that he could effectively use this checklist the same as me.
Yeah, no, that's good. And that's actually how we've been structuring the AU materials. Here's the thing to know, and then here's where you get more information. So let me restate this because I still think it holds true. If we had a checklist for you that had references on how to get more information, and then you could give that checklist to him and talk to him about it, but then here's how you get more information. It seems to be the same thing.
Yeah, it would, assuming he had access to that information, yes.
Well, why would we hide it?
I'm just making
You're
that.
right. I appreciate it. I'm sorry. You're right. And that's why, you know, that's why I'm writing this book. Because I intend to put all of AU on this in this book. Except what you don't have is this interaction, that the real value of AU is the interaction, the trying, and the collaboration. And what's fun for me anyway about it, and it seems to be fun for a lot of you in it, is we co-create as we go. That's kind of what we're doing now. Okay, so that gives you a step in the right direction. Now, this is the other important thing. Does anybody think I've given Andrew enough to go off and be masterful at this? And he could just do it, doesn't need me
I
anymore?
just okay.
Yeah,
I just want to make yeah. I want to make a comment, and uh, I'm just thinking. I'm not sure if it completely applies, but what if we engage them to come from where they are? Like, okay, what do they want to? How do they want to carry out their own job? And then we can now pick it from there and say, what if they add this to what they are doing? Maybe they will better appreciate the new way by coming from where they are.
that's perfect, Abisi. I got some really bad news for those of you that think there's an easy answer. Harry Potter is a made up thing. It's very entertaining. I've read all of his books. I've seen all of his movies, but there's no such thing as a magic wand. I don't know how to find one. Maybe it's good for me because I wouldn't have a job if there was, but the reality is there's no magic wand. What you point out, Abisi, is in the same way Andrew is going to take time to try it and learn, and this person he's coaching is going to take time to try it and learn. These people are going to take time to look at things and learn over time. This is like the idea of a Toyota kata. You do a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. It's over time. So that's one thing you have to recognize is taking place. And that's right. That's the other path. So then the question that becomes, that deals with this. So here's like, how do we convey things? And then is there a set of steps we can work with them to understand? And I think we need to lay all this out. How can someone shift? Like, this is really good because I had to be candid. You just opened up something for me. So in this
Well,
against, I'm sorry, go. Yeah. And then I'll say what opened up for me.
yeah, I was going to say, well, I was thinking about this. We talk about understanding what people must see in order to be effective. I have a past to teach them this. One of the best ways to understand what people need to see is to understand what they see now.
That's right.
Is to allow them. One of the I think the things that I have learned most about being a coach is it's so much less about what I have to tell people and so much more about what they have to tell me.
Exactly. Because you need to create a path. I'm going to say something that's so obvious but ignored. If your job is to create a path from where they are to where they would be more effective, you have to know where they are.
Right.
Duh. Well, I don't mind read either. You know, I used to have a running joke at Objectives about the inability. I'm so frustrated you guys don't read my mind. And they all knew it was a joke, but there was one guy I hired who he heard me say that the first time, he thought I was serious. But the second time I said it, he said, "Now I know you're kidding." Yeah, Susan, you were gonna say.
One of the, I've dealt with this kind of situation before, and one of the things often it's, if instead of making it the role is changing, is making it, could we try this one thing? And
That's
something that will have some visible results that could be seen to be adding value. And obviously, I don't know what that would be in this case.
no, but what you're doing, let me state the bigger context of what you're doing. What you're doing is you're creating safety
Yes,
because
always.
if it doesn't work, you can regress. I actually wrote a case study. I added it to the book. I just added this. I know I just added. I wrote, this was it was it was a case study where I talked about an engagement where they were afraid to try something because it was going, they were worried they wouldn't get their job done. So what I had them do is say, well, what if we just say, let's try this, see if we can get there for a couple hours, and if we can't see a good path forward, we'll give it up. And they said, oh yeah, I can do that. And the reason that happened was because of because there was now maybe I didn't put it up here. There was now the space to try it but not be locked into it. So this is another thing. How do you deal with the safety issues? So I'll bet you, if we were to start elaborating these, I'll bet you we'd find there are 3 or 4 issues. So what do they consider value? What are the techniques? And we should list those. And I'll do that. But yeah, Tony.
I was just thinking, with what Sue said, the word hackles came to mind. What she suggested is, her suggestion is, does not raise the hackles of the person she is talking to. And that's a feature. If you're like this, you're not going to listen, and you're not going to be in the, it's just a footnote to what she said, and also what to you
Yeah.
said.
Well, and it's also like, I mean, I think this is great because I mean, as you say, like once you say it, it's obvious, but because I think this way in other ways or in other areas, but I hadn't really applied that same thinking to this. But this particular transition from this way of thinking to the new way of thinking is something that I'm going to have, well, I've had to deal with before and I have to deal with it now, but it exists in this particular case because the variety of things that happened in the delivery of this particular engagement that we didn't fully account for all the things that should have happened. So if I had really addressed some of this stuff the way it ought to have been addressed in the beginning, then this problem would be, if it was still there, it wouldn't be as big. But because of the way things went, we got pulled in different directions. And I mean, this is a learning experience for me, and I've since written it down differently. But this is something that I learned that I did not address adequately when trying to help people make this transition. So now he's got this mess, and I have to figure out how to help him get out of this mess.
Okay. So here's what I want to do. We're at the time for the presentation's over. I'd like you to think about other questions in coaching. Now we can continue this as a conversation. Okay. So we don't need to change topics. So there have been things out on the web page that are been there that you might have questions about. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about what questions you want to ask. And we can also, that can continue discussing this topic, because I think real situations are how you learn, because it's not theory, it's a combination of theory and reality and practice. So I'll be back actually in a minute. Okay, so questions or continued dialogue on this? And Andrew, you're free to keep going because I think people are getting engaged in this.
Well, I mean, I think you've given me some things to think about and approach. It occurs to me that the other question that I had that I sent to you in the email is actually somewhat related to this. Because I suspect that it's based on what you just said, more about the fear that they're not going to be able to do their job. But one of the other issues that's happening with this particular client is, I have suggested that they make some pretty dramatic changes to the way that they deliver value. Some of the things that they expect that they need are not actually necessary anymore. And there was an acceptance of that in the beginning, and then now that it's been time and they've tried to actually do it, then they're kind of trying to claw back. And from an agile delivery point of view, which they claim they're doing, but they're not really, they still want, because the terms that came up was, how do we deal with effectively fixed deliverables and where the sign-offs go and all of this? And if it's really agile delivery, which is what I was trying to get them to me, it seems like that these are sort of holdovers from non-agile thinking or fears that need to be addressed, that if we don't address those and really deal with the underlying fears, it's not about whether there's deliverables or sign-offs. It's about, back to what you said, they're afraid that if they don't have those things, that they're not going to get their job done and they're going to get blamed for something if it goes wrong, I think.
So here's the thing, are those not valid fears?
I'm not discounting their fears.
Oh, no, I know you're not. I know you're not. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to underscore something here. If we did say, and if we agree, and I think we do, that you're have to come from where they are, which means we need to know where they are, and where they are is where they are. Have you ever found somebody in fear and you say, oh, don't be afraid? You say, well, it's one thing to say, maybe don't be afraid to recognize there's no need for fear. But you ever say, oh, I'm afraid? I said, no, you're not.
Oh.
Or you're angry. Somebody says, I'm angry. Says, no, you're not. You know what? It doesn't do any good. It's usually does just the opposite. Okay. So what I'm saying is, where they are is where they are, because it's a declaration. This is one of the things also I learned from Flores. People can declare what their emotions are. They're not always right, actually. Sometimes people will say one thing and they mean something else, but very often they mean what they say. And if somebody says they're afraid, and that actually will evoke things. The point is, don't try to argue them out of it. So the question is this, and this is something I haven't made very clear. I think the aces get this, but anybody listening may or may not. Amplio is not my idea, in a sense. It's my integration of things that have been demonstrated to work. And one of these things is that because it's based on flow, lean, and theory of constraints, I'm not trying to sell Amplio here. I'm trying to make a point because it's very important. Because, wrong button, wrong screen. What I'm trying to say is, this works fine, different file. What I'm saying is, if we are building off of things that are actually universal, and some things are universal, practices may not be, often aren't, mostly aren't. But if we're talking about the way you have to convince people or convey new ideas is something that's set. If our ideas are things that are going to work, then what we want to do is, if they say they're afraid, then our ideas, our approach should make them less afraid if they did them. And if our ideas are going to make them I don't mean less afraid in the moment, but they should be a place that's safer, is what I mean. In other words, if they're saying they're afraid that if I remove these, it's going to give me this result. Sorry, forget what I said. Let me restate it. I didn't say anything wrong, but I didn't say it well. See, I'm working on this right here. They're afraid it's going to make things worse. Now, you don't want them to go down this path if it is going to make things worse. Is that correct? So you have some confidence it's going to make it better.
Correct.
So what we want to do is not discount where they are. What we want to do is show that what we're suggesting will actually make things better. So what's the path for that? And this is where you have to have confidence in the approach you're taking. Yeah, Abizi, did you want to say something? I saw your hand pop up.
Yes, I'm beginning to think also this in line with transitioning, and since you talk about agile adoption,
Yeah, totally.
and my emphasis would be that maybe the adoption is too fast. We're not supposed to be doing too many things, and then people are struggling to make the transition to the new way of work. So maybe I'm not sure if we are doing too many things at the same time, and that is why you are facing the resistance.
Yeah, no, you nailed it there. This is the other thing that's interesting. It's like, well, we presuppose values and we don't say what to do if they don't have those values. But actually, most people have the values of wanting to add and contribute, but they may not have the value of other things that are presupposed. But if you have a practice, you may have to transition to the practice. Yet, as far as I know, no popular, in fact, I'm not sure any framework does. I don't know of any framework that tells you how to transition to its practices. It just says, do this. And the interesting thing is that you mentioned, Abizi, is we often go too fast. Well, actually going from here to there in one step is usually too fast. Going too slow is also a problem. It causes different issues. So we have some interesting things in the agile space, and then we wonder why we're having problems. We don't bother to look where people are to see where they need to, so that you can see the path. We don't bother to look at how people are going to react and learn. And we don't look to see what transition rate we should be doing with people. So we tend to just jump to it, overwhelm them. Or what's the alternative? The alternative is to have them be failures. Now that sounds funny, but let me explain it. If you're here and you need to go here and you're unable to jump to that, that puts an unable ability on you. And that feels bad because your value is on what you're able to do. So people are not going to say, oh, I can't do that. People often don't say, I can't do that. What they'll say is that is wrong. Because I can't do that puts some less value on me, and I'm going to defend my value till hell freezes over. But that's wrong. Well, it's wrong. End of story. You're just misguided. Oh, consultants do this to me all the time. They don't pay attention to the real world. So talking about that's wrong puts all the responsibility on that, and it makes anybody who's pushing it on me just a salesman, whereas I'm now safe and capable and able, and I actually see what's true. So those three things are amazing that we don't pay attention to them.
Yeah.
I see you all nodding. This is human nature. This is, again, this part's left out. And what's
very
funny,
much the dynamic in this case. And appetite, and then, but the part you didn't mention is the appetite for the rate of change and the desired rate of change, because of the desired time frame for the results from the people driving it, is very different than the safety
that's right,
and comprehension of the people who need to do it. And then it basically sets up that dynamic from the very beginning.
that's right, that's right. Yeah, very often when I've gone into places, one of the things I have to convince management is to go slower. And it's not to go slower to go faster. That drives me nuts. It's you go slower because that works. You go small changes because that's the fastest way to make change. I'll give an example. So I'm a guy. That means I don't read instructions. So I don't read instructions. I tell what I joke. The running joke is when my wife wants me to put something together and I do read the instructions, I said, okay, honey, I emasculated myself for your benefit. She just laughs. She knows what I mean. But when I don't read instructions, what often happens is I do it 3 times. I do it once wrong, then I fix it. That's the second time. And then I do it once like the right time. And I have my ego. Well, at least I figured it out on my own without reading the instructions. But at some point, I got that going, reading the instructions. See, now that's not going slow. That's focusing on getting clear on what I need to do. You can say it's slow because I'm not actually building anything. But why do we conflate building with the value add? See, this is where Agile is, again, overstepped. There's sometimes really good steps to understand what you're doing. And I don't care if it's complex. I know it's complex, but that doesn't mean, in fact, if anything, because it's complex, you need to take more time to figure out what might happen. It doesn't mean try to build it, try to design it. It's like in complexity, you have to know what you can do and what you can't do. So doing analysis forever, thinking you can do that, that's silly because we know we can't. But spending a little bit of time saying, well, what might complexity be making we don't see? What kind of risks are we taking? This is, oh, I don't think it's Edgar Schein. It's this other guy, I forget his name, where he comes up with a pre-mortem. It might even be Schein. Where you actually have a discussion where you make it safe for people to talk about what might go wrong. Now, here's the good news, Andrew, and I think you've already expressed this, but I want to emphasize it to others and to you as a rule. We've been talking about things to attend to, right? And we haven't laid out the templates, and we haven't really worked out a full way of doing it. But you've looked to me, I may be misreading because I do that a lot, but it sounds like the mere fact that you've started knowing what to look at gives you a lot more confidence and ability to do the right thing. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I could have approached it a number of different ways, but just kind of, hey, this is really the important thing to consider now. And then that helped.
Yeah, so
It also reinforces the importance of having a robust and effective assessment process for doing things. So the stuff we're doing with the spreadsheet and going through the GPS and being able to evaluate where people are is critical, because the more you can do that, the easier it is to make the case for going at a particular cadence, regardless if they want it done yesterday.
Yeah, so the reason I mentioned this is people don't what's the word? They not acknowledge is the wrong word, but something like that. They don't recognize the importance of this comment. We don't think and talk about what we see. We see we're able to think and talk about, which means if it's not in our speaking, we're not seeing it. What I'm suggesting is knowing what to look at without knowing what to do about it is immensely important. And this idea that we can be purposely incomplete, well, that means we're not looking at a lot of stuff. This stuff that I can have this framework that gets me focusing on a framework, and then I'll look outside of the framework, basically has us not look at what we need to, which is outside of the framework. What we need is, instead of coming from values and practices, we need to be coming from what highlights what we need to look at. And that's why I look at principles, because they're everywhere. And if you look at principles and something comes up, you can ask yourself, well, what's stopping this from working? What is, and you could go through the list. I'm gonna mention this. Let me pull up one other thing, because I think this is what's been getting more and more obvious to me. And we've talked about this a lot. Why are these things, like we talk about first principles? And I just got a really interesting idea. Damn. I think we actually did this once, but I never finished writing it. We talked about first principles of learning. And we got it, we actually, I modified it a bit and I've been putting it in the insights book I've got, which is kind of a newslettery thing. But aren't we talking about here are first principles of shifting people's actions? Like they're going to identify, they're going to look at safety. They're going to look at what their value is. They're going to be like Abizi said, we've got to go at a certain pace. That's not learning. That's something else. That's a shift. So that's a good idea. I think we should enumerate those. I'll take a cut at it and then we can talk about it in an AU session. Yeah, Susan.
Oh, and one more thing to the point of maybe having to slow down, you also need to, when somebody does do something in the right direction, you need to point out and make a big deal of it, or at least a little deal
That's
of
right.
it.
Encourage it.
And point out how the next step relates to that.
Well, yes. See, this is like, maybe I didn't emphasize this enough. It's like what we're doing is we're saying we're properly preparing. We're going to defer.
Yes.
We're going to defer trying to get some work or change done until we know we're prepared for it. We're not going to go down the trap of thinking we can get it all done because we're in a complex environment and we know we cannot do that. And sometimes what Abizi said about it's too much for people, sometimes you have no clue what to do. See, like I want to emphasize this, maybe just get it on the recording, is I do think there's, in all situations, there's something you can know will be an improvement. But there's also a lot of things you know need to be improved that you don't know how to jump to the end at all. And I'll give an example. This is a case study I hope we do tomorrow in AU, where one of the people in the university has a lot of people on a lot of teams doing a lot of different stuff. Okay, now this is common. In fact, you go into most companies and you ask people to raise your hand. How many people are working on one or two things? Almost no hands go up. How many? 3 or 4? A lot of hands go up. 4 or 5 or 6. A lot of hands go up. Well, I know how to combat that. I know what the end result looks like, but how to get there? No. But I know some small steps. And what you do is you take some small steps and some more small steps and some more small steps until you get there. That's an emergent structure. And the reason you do it is twofold. One is, as Abizi pointed out, you put a lot of strain on people if you do a massive change because there's fear, they've lost their identity, all bad stuff. But part of it is you have no clue how to get there in one step. Not that'll work. So this preparation, see, the reason I don't like using the phrase slow down is you're not really slowing down. What you're doing is you're not adding value yet until you're ready. You can add value in an intelligent way. You're focusing, you're refocusing what you're doing. And the only reason I'm not trying to be semantical argument here, but slowing down in business, let me ask you this. If you went into 10 different companies and you got 10 minutes with a CEO, and the first thing you said is, I'm going to teach you how to slow down, you'll be out the door before you can say the next word. People don't like to hear this. Now, I know what you mean, but they don't know what you mean. And you don't even mean that. You're not slowing down, you're shifting your focus. I'm going to read the stupid instructions because it's actually going to speed me up to getting value. My body isn't slowing. My body is shifting. I'm using my mind. I think David Marquet calls this blue work versus red work. Red work is the doing and the blue work is the thinking about what to do. Okay. Closing questions, comments. It was a good session, I think. Yeah. Okay, well, this is going to be how the COPs go from now on. I'm going to come up with the topic, but I want to say this, and I'm glad you asked the question, Andrew. If somebody has a tough question, not like a question about what I'm doing, but you have a problem in your own space, that's what you got to contact me ahead of time, though. Don't just show up. And, I mean, here Andrew is asking a question about something I presented. That's perfect. You can do that all you want. But I mean, if you actually want to take a specific problem and deal with it without mine, then give me an advance notice. But maybe this is just how we do it. This seemed to be pretty nice like this. I'll bring a concept and then somebody can ask about it. Okay, great. Well, I won't see you next week, and I won't see you the week after that because next week's Christmas Eve, and then it goes to New Year's Eve, and then we'll pick this back up. What I guess the 7th of of January. So everybody, thanks for being here and have a great holiday season and be thankful for what you have, because know that whatever it is you have, and sometimes you feel short of what you have, everybody here is better off than most everybody else in the planet. That's what I always try to remember when I'm not feeling so great about things. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care,
Yeah,
everybody.
thanks
Bye-bye.
everyone and happy holidays to everybody.
Holidays.
Yes, happy holidays. Thank you, Al.
Nice holiday. Bye.
Yeah.